Thank you so much for having me here today to speak about social and in particular ROI. It's a topic I really love to talk about. I'll just kind of preface it initially for people who've been meeting me so far at the conference, and hopefully after the conference I'll get to chat to a few more of you. But if I don't shake your hands, it's not because I'm germ-phobic or anything. I had an argument with the sidewalk, and I'm accepting fist bumps and hugs, so that's an option. One of our company values is grit in all we do, and I feel like I'm really living it at the moment. So, my name is Ava. I'm the head of social and marketing operations at Hootsuite, and what that means is I oversee our global social marketing strategy and team, and oversee the marketing operations side, which is aligning our marketing plan to our business objectives. And of course, at Hootsuite, being a social media company, we're trying to do a lot of things social first and show others how that works and how to add value through social. So just to start with, I'd love to know maybe a quick raise of hands. Who's familiar with Hootsuite as a company? Oh, it's like most of the room. And how many of you might be using Hootsuite? Okay, everyone else can leave. So for anyone who doesn't know Hootsuite, we are the leading social media management platform. We have, I think, 18 million users at this point in 175 countries. And through our customers, we learn so much, and a lot of the content you'll see here today is really built to help our customers succeed, and it's something that we then like to kind of share more broadly, because social is a pretty complex, constantly changing place. So hopefully this will give you a framework that you can actually apply pretty much immediately to the efforts that you might be doing or starting. And so just before we get into the nuts and the bolts of what social ROI means and how we define it, I always like to take a step back and kind of talk about how did we get to where we are today? What are we facing, especially in the digital landscape? And I think we can all agree that in today's world, change really is the new normal. Nothing seems to stay the same for more than a few hours, maybe a day or a week. And one of my favorite examples to illustrate the rate of change is if we look at how quickly people adopt technology. And so 75 years was approximately how long it took for 50 million people to adopt the telephone. By contrast, it only took about half of that time for 50 million people to adopt a radio, and about a third of the time to adopt television. And so at this point, I always like to open it up and let people just shout out an answer. How long do you think it took for 50 million people to adopt Instagram? 18 months, yeah, so I think a lot of people were pretty close to that. But it's pretty remarkable how quickly now we can not only build technology, but get it in the hands of millions of people. And I think we'll only see this continue to rise. I'm sure the adoption of TikTok was like an hour for 50 million people. You're like the only audience that has ever laughed at my jokes. So social really has become the place where we not only discover brands, where we connect with friends and family, but we actually make a lot of decisions now through social. We're seeking recommendations, we're asking for feedback, we're watching videos, we're making our buying decisions, and then we're showing the love or the hate for the brands that we love and hate on social. And while there's been so many channels that have given us audiences at mass scale before, social is really unique in its ability to do this with really precise targeting. And of course, this raises a lot of questions with Cambridge Analytica and et cetera, and there's a lot of laws that need to come into place. But it's not only giving us this massive scale with very high relevancy, but it's also giving us an opportunity to have two-way conversations that not many other channels can match. And we're seeing businesses really taking notice by how much they're spending and investing in social. So currently, social marketing might take up maybe 11, 13% of a marketing budget for a relatively, let's say a company over 1,000 people. And they're expecting this to rise by 89% in the next 5 years. So it's a pretty large investment. And this is from the CMO survey from 2019. And so given the nature of social, given the nature of the users on social, how do we measure the impact? And so every year we do a trend survey. So in one of our most recent surveys, we found that over half of the respondents, similar marketers, found that not being able to prove the ROI made it really difficult for them to feel successful with social. And a large part of this comes back to knowing what are the right metrics to track, which we will go into more depth on. And ultimately, without really understanding what to measure and if you're being successful, how do you then get support for budget or more budget if you have some, more headcount, continue innovating and learning and investing into social? So what we'll talk about today is first taking a look at why are companies and marketers struggling with measuring their efforts on social? what is a framework that you can put into place that we've seen customers successfully use, as well as ourselves. And then we'll do a bit of a deep dive into one of the trends in our report that I think is going to be particularly interesting and relevant for today's discussion. And then I'll leave some time for Q&A. Sound good? So first, this is something that we've been thinking a lot about, especially over the last, I'd say, 3 to 5 years. And it's not necessarily getting easier, but we are getting smarter at how we approach this challenge. So given how much we're spending on social, whether it's through advertising, how much time we're investing in creating content, we all sort of know we should be on social as a brand. Our customers are probably there. If we're not, they're talking about us or they're talking to our competitors. But we're all asking this question, which is how can I show the value of my social efforts? And while it seems like a simple question, it's probably one of these consistently complex issues that we're all facing, especially if you're a marketer. I think this is just, and maybe it's across all channels, but I find it a particularly complex challenge. And so ROI isn't just about doing better on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or Twitter or Reddit or what, you might build large audiences, you might run video campaigns that win awards, but ultimately it's how do you translate that into an impact on the bottom line for your business. And so we know that 80% of Fortune 500 companies have an active Facebook page of some sort, but only 20% of them feel able to quantitatively show the impact of that work. And that's a big gap. So ROI is not just about buying more analytics tools, and luckily there are a lot of free tools as well that you can use. The data helps, but you need to know where to look and what to measure. And it's not about one perfect metric, whether it's engagement rate today, conversion rate tomorrow. These metrics come and go out of favorability, but ultimately the challenge is that it's hard to tie social activities to these visible lifts in revenue or supporting other business goals. And we'll talk a lot more about how to pick the right metrics for your business. So we felt that we needed to redefine what social ROI meant. And I feel like even that phrase, social ROI, is a little confusing for people. And there was 2 reasons. The first is that not every organization or business can attribute a financial transaction directly to social. There's often a lot of influence along a customer journey. I think e-commerce through social, like if you're running using shoppable pins, like you can directly see a sale come from that channel, but that's not always the case. And sales and revenue is only just one of the ways that you can use social to drive success in a business. So we felt at Hootsuite we needed a more clear, realistic definition. Even this is still quite high level, but we define it as the sum of all the social media actions that create value. And thinking about it is sort of in a bit of a broader way. If you avoid limiting yourself to an overly traditional definition of ROI, then you avoid potentially missing out on other areas that you're adding value for the business, and we'll talk through what the wide scope of that can look like. Fortunately, there's no magic formula, so I'm not going to give you X plus Y equals C, and that's it. That's all you need to know. If I did have that, I would have just showed you the one slide, and we'd be done. So, but this is kind of a very high-level way of how I like to think about it. So if you're beyond the revenue piece, which is obviously essential for any business, we're looking at how does social enhance customer service. I think we can all agree we've gone to Twitter at some point to be like, Air Canada, where's my flight? Or if you are trying to drive a certain brand perception, if you're trying to improve brand awareness, if you're trying to manage your reputation through social listening to see what are your customers saying about you. Funny, not funny story. The Evergreen campaign that we run, we had a blog post that we were sharing again from maybe a year or 2 ago. We literally took the title of the blog post, scheduled it 1 or 2 days out, you don't want to go too far out, and it was about Twitter being like a big red button. And I don't know if this sounds familiar to anyone else, but a certain president tweeted about Twitter being a big red button about 40 minutes before a pre-scheduled tweet came out. And we noticed that this had happened because we suddenly got a flood of comments through our social listening streams about us potentially being a supporter of that president, and we are neutral. So, so anyways, and then obviously all the way down to recruitment and advocacy is a big part of how we use social as well. But if you were to think about what am I trying to do in my business, there's a good chance that at least one of these applies to what you're trying to do with your business, and therefore social is a relevant channel that you can utilize to support that. But it comes with a certain level of maturity to get that understanding of what is the goal I'm trying to solve for and how do I measure it effectively. And what we're also seeing is that more and more, especially with marketing executives, they're being asked to report more on revenue-driven KPIs So it's becoming more and more imperative that you can tie your social activities to visible lifts in revenue or other types of business value. And this kind of brings me to the controversial topic of vanity metrics. And so when we're talking about these, it's things like likes, comments, shares, views. And I would say that they're only a vanity metric if they have no relationship to a business objective. And they're essential really for understanding, is your strategy working day to day? This is what's telling us, if we benchmark against ourselves, what's resonating with an audience versus something else, which ties into our content strategy heavily. And it also really effectively lets us understand, how do we stack up against our competitors? Are they doing something that we're not, that we can learn from? Or can we learn from totally different companies in different industries for what's working well for them? And all of that publicly available data is an excellent place to start if you're not sure where to start. A good example is mentions, which is how you would measure your social share of voice, and that's integral to understanding brand awareness in social, and how much of the conversation are you dominating relative to your competitors or your industry. And so in order to ask a smarter ROI question, you need to be really specific about what you're trying to achieve with social. So it first comes with defining it and mapping those KPIs to a business objective, and ultimately understanding, what is the business challenge you're trying to solve with social? Is it to increase revenue, efficiency, customer satisfaction? Then setting really clearly defined goals, like you would with any kind of SMART goal. So for example, if your goal is to help drive attendees to a conference like this one, you would have quite a specific content strategy to then back that up, and you would measure what's relevant to that goal, which is, are people clicking through to my website? Are they purchasing tickets? What content's driving the highest conversion rate or for the lowest cost of acquisition? And then you need to show the results and share the insights. And you can kind of do this with 3 pretty basic questions, which is, 1, did you achieve the goal? If you did, what was most effective and why? And then if you didn't, what are you going to fine tune or test to see if you can hit that number next time? And so now that we kind of understand where the struggle begins, which is understanding what is the business goal that you're trying to solve, it comes down to then, how do you put a measurement plan in place to help you understand if you're meeting that objective? And step 1 is really just about understanding how much are you investing into social media, like you would do with any other channel. And typically what we see is, obviously people look at budget and they say, oh, I'm spending X dollars on social ads, therefore I'm investing this much. But that's just return on ad spend. Your true investment includes the cost of the tools, the platforms that you're using, as well as, ideally, the time being spent by your employees or contractors or agencies that you're using to create the content. That factors into time that could have been spent on other activities, so you need to know, how is that returning? We did this as an exercise a few years ago. We found that the amount of time and effort it took to produce a video for a campaign for social or similar channels was like $10,000. And then when we did like a scrappy live video or a little social video using an app, it was like $200 worth of employee time, and the return therefore was like tenfold for our own activities versus these massive campaigns where there's loads of strategists involved. So it doesn't have to cost a lot to drive a lot of return, but it's important to understand how much time are you spending and how much does it cost. Then it's about setting those objectives that connect to those business goals. So whether you're looking to drive conversions, awareness, customer experience, improve security, picking the right area is really important. If you're not really sure where to start, think about what area of the business is most urgent. So work with the other leaders of your organization to get a feel for, is there an area of the business outside of marketing, for example, that actually I can help with through social that will add value in addition to sharing content, building awareness, etc. And the HR recruiting piece is actually one that I really love using social for. We decided to do a couple of pilot tests last year. We worked with our recruiter who was trying to hire a lot of people in sales and in our product team for developers. And so we worked with them to bring on the teams that we're hiring so that they could talk about what life was like on the team, what projects they're working on, what they're excited about. We had them live stream on social, on our channels. We had them do AMAs on Instagram. They took over our stories. They took over our LinkedIn channel. And we saw a massive increase in the number of applicants during the time window that we ran those activities. And then we also saw a much shorter closing time on how long it took for them to finish and submit an application. And then everything kind of went back to normal when we stopped our social activities. So it's something that we then take the ones that worked best, and then we'll repeat them again this year and see if we continue iterating on them. And then it comes to the metrics piece. One way to think about this is the customer journey as a foundation for that. It's, if we think about how much the landscape has changed, a lot of these physical touch points have really shifted to digital, and it's going to impact how you run your business and how customers find you and interact with you and make purchases. So what you can do is actually look at how social metrics can align to a customer journey, as an example here, using quite a simplified journey. And kind of similarly here, you can help then navigate to the right KPIs using this idea of the customer journey. So for example, if you're looking to generate sales leads, your customer's likely in the intent stage. They might be looking at reports, they might be watching review videos, and maybe signing up for a trial, and therefore what you'd be measuring from social would be, how many people am I sending to the right page on my website that might contribute to this? Are they clicking through to download a report, for example, or read about what I can get in a trial? And that will help you understand where your customer might be at. And then ultimately, there are kind of 3 basic questions to ask yourself when picking those metrics. Does it align, obviously, with the objective? And then does it help you make a decision? It's really important. There's so much data out there, and especially with social, the networks give you a lot of numbers up front. You really need to focus on what are the ones that matter for you for making a decision, because you can really bog yourself down with tracking all the numbers, and we can spend a lot of time in reporting, and that doesn't always help. So we try and really narrow it down to just the few metrics that will help us make a decision. And the third point is particularly important. If you're the person doing the work, or you have a team that's doing it, do they have the tools and the training to effectively measure their efforts? And so oftentimes teams will, they'll build a great strategy, but if they don't have the right connections within the business or the right tools, they're not set up for success to actually measure those efforts. So here's an example of how you can start to see social metrics map across that journey for a company looking to launch a promotional sale. So it's pretty basic, but it's just getting this down on paper and then understanding what ones matter most to you as a business. And then ultimately, once you have those pieces in place, it's calculating that impact and then comparing it ideally to other channels, but knowing that it's not always apples to apples. So in its entirety, this is the highlight of the 4-step framework that we recommend starting with. And I should have noted this at the beginning. I shared my Twitter handle, which will come up again later, but I used the Hootsuite tool to pre-schedule supporting content for a lot of this to come out as we talk. So if you go on Twitter later, you'll find guides and resources that dive into this in a little bit more detail. And actually, I scheduled it all for 9 a.m. and then at midnight last night, I was like, oh God, it's at 11, and changed it. And so this kind of comes back to the idea of so much value can be had from social outside of just marketing. So whether it's supporting revenue for sales, the brand piece with marketing, recruiting and HR, customer service, product is one of my favorite areas that we're building out at Hootsuite, which is how do we better leverage our product team to communicate the value of the product and how to use it, but also how do we bring the data back to them? There's so much data being generated in real time about your product and your business that you want to harness what people are saying about you and what they're saying about your competitors and general pain points, and that can help inform a product roadmap or where you might have opportunities to jump in and fill a niche. So some of the tools that we use, and we touched a bit on this in the panel, is things like making sure that you have the right tools in place ahead of time. You can't really retroactively go back and get some of this data, so ensure that you have pixel codes, your analytics set up, all in advance. And UTMs especially, like if you know that you're going to be tracking, you've created a piece of content, you want to track the impact, consistency is essential. Make sure that everything is the same. If it's lowercase, camel case, whatever, it needs to be identical so that analytics can group it all and you don't have to try and manually merge it all together. And so this brings me to the third section, which is the social trends piece. And this is my favorite piece of content that we produce every year. It's our biggest report. We do a massive survey with marketers all around the world, different organizations, and we pull out what we think are the 5 trends facing marketers that they need to know the most. And then we talk about how do you manage and prepare for the shifts. And so obviously this is one of the pieces that I'll share on Twitter, but we're going to deep dive into, in particular, the 4th trend today, which is the convergence of social marketing and performance marketing, which ties in really nicely to our discussion about organic reach declining as well. So it really begins with a lot of these shifts that we're seeing is really changing the role of the social marketer, or generally speaking, the marketers in businesses that are overseeing this as part of a broader role. In particular, we're seeing the disappearing likes across channels like Facebook and Instagram. We're seeing ultimately a decline of organic reach, especially over the last 2 to 3 years. We're seeing a lot of brands enter the space on social through advertising. It's not even organic from the beginning in all cases anymore. And we're seeing higher and higher expectations to deliver concrete ROI, particularly from executives. And so this is really influencing what senior marketers are citing as their top goal for this coming year is driving conversions. And when I say conversions, I mean specific outcomes like a click, a lead, a sale. And ultimately, performance marketing delivers those types of numbers that executives are used to seeing from other marketing channels. Therefore, social marketers are now gravitating more and more towards performance marketing tactics. But what's really important to remember is that you need both to succeed in the long term, to thrive as a business. It's not just about short-term tactics that might have a temporary lift in revenue, like you would see with performance marketing, like a promotion or a sale. It's the brand piece that really builds the brand over time for sustained growth. And you need a balance of both to really maximize what you can do with social and have ultimately a balance. So we're finding even internally, we work closely with our ads team to try and offset and not drive too many discounts, not do too many promotions, ensure that we're balancing it with brand building activities so that we add value over time as well. And in addition to kind of the shift that it's having on executives and CMOs in marketing in general, we're seeing the shift in social marketing teams and structures and skills as well. And so they pretty much have to do everything now. Like as a community manager, you're engaging day to day with your customers online. You're building out strategy of how are you going to create the creative content that will sustain your publishing content calendars. In addition, you're kind of building and optimizing ads on the fly, and you're working hopefully with someone who understands the data and can show you the impact of your efforts as well, unless that's you are literally the one person doing all of this, which I have in previous roles. And so what we're seeing is that the more advanced organizations are investing in a hybrid skill set. And it really is the creative left and the left and the right brain coming together. How do you combine the creative side with the data side to ensure that you're balancing these things and thinking not just short term, but also long term? And so some of our recommendations around this is to think about how to creatively use retargeting on social to create more full funnel campaigns. So instead of creating one ad that can do everything from awareness to conversion, you can really creatively release the story at the top of the funnel that builds awareness and pulls people into your brand and your values and what you stand for. And then you can target those who are really engaged with it or took certain actions and send them to the next stage and show them maybe something more concrete about a product. Or maybe if you're in a B2B space, you can then send them a white paper, a case study, and you can move people down the funnel really creatively with retargeting on social. And so this is where you could move from like a boosted post to an actual ad based on the results of that initial post. And I know that this came up a little bit in the talk earlier as well, but social and search coming together is really important. And we're seeing both spaces shift quite a lot. But if you think about how much effort you put into social at the top of the funnel, creating all this awareness and people search for your brand, what you don't want is to send them to your competitor's ad on search because they have their strategy planned out. So you do kind of want to keep in mind how are you supporting all of your social activities with search and making sure that you rank highly in those results. So if people look for you, they'll find you. And then the third piece is anything brand related takes time to perform, and that's really hard for us to balance at the moment with executives. It's easy to see short-term impacts from performance marketing tactics, but we want to make sure that if we're doing a brand building activity, we're giving it the time to perform. And we know that with any kind of effective advertising, it takes a bit of time and repetition of a message for it to really sink in with your audience. So same thing goes on social. You need to give it a bit of time to perform, even though it's really tempting to have all of this data available in the short term and make quick tweaks all the time. It's one thing to optimize to make sure, if I've got 5 ads running, 2 are clearly underperforming, I'm going to turn those off and redirect the budget. It makes sense. But if your brand campaign is only going to run for a week or 2 weeks, that's not a brand campaign. And so that kind of wraps up that particular part of my presentation. I would highly recommend deep diving into the full report because the other trends are also really interesting. I know one of them specifically mentions TikTok, which I think has been mentioned a few times already today, and I have not spent any time on that platform. So I'm trying to limit how many channels I'm personally on. But so there's my tiny handle. Ava lives here. Please follow me, ask me questions on there. If we don't get around to it today, I'm happy to continue the conversation. And in the meantime, if there are any questions, I'd be delighted to take them. No questions. I did it perfectly. Thank you.